The NIH has long been celebrated for its role in funding foundational biomedical research that often leads to life-saving drugs, much of it enabled through the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980. However, we're now seeing an onslaught of legislative threats upon the NIH's role in the creation of new intellectual property and inventions. Today on this Vital Health podcast, I'm speaking with Mark Rohrbaugh, the former Director of Technology Transfer and Innovation Policy of the National Institutes of Health. Mark, it's always great to see you.
You too. Thank you for the invitation.
And I'm also joined by my colleague, IP Specialist Gwen O'Loughlin. Gwen, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
It's good to see you both. So, Mark, can you tell me a bit about your time at the NIH? In particular, how has the U.S. IP ecosystem evolved since 1980 and the passage of the Bayh-Dole Act since your involvement?
Significantly.
Yeah.
Of course, the biotech revolution in the 70s and 80s changed dramatically the technologies that were of interest and available for commercialization. Also, the industry has changed. We all know that big pharma is not doing the research it used to. A lot of biotech, smaller companies are doing research that developed into new drugs that are then manufactured and sold by large pharma.
Now, you have an interesting background because before you went to the NIH, you actually did this for real. You were working in the industry.
I worked for two startup biotech companies in Minnesota that were more I was in the biology end, but they were device companies.
And how much of that work that you were working with was in partnership with universities? How much of that technology had some aspect of this in collaboration with schools in the U.S.?
Some of it did. It's more in terms of ideas and consultation with the University of Minnesota, but the actual technology didn't come out directly out of the university.
There's kind of a gray area there. It's an ecosystem.
Right.
And so what drove you to decide to cross the Rubicon, as it were, and join the public sector?
Well, I've always been interested in industry and biology and biotechnology, biochemistry. And when I was doing my postdoc at University of Minnesota, through a friend, learned about this guy who was at a startup trying to build a microbiology, biotechnology program within the company, and I talked to him, and he said, "We'd love to have you," and I joined the company.
And when was that?
1985.
And then when did you decide to leave there and come into the NIH?
Well, I laughed because each company had massive layoffs for
But I'm assured that all biotech companies are just reservoirs of cash.
Well, yeah, not for science. I was naive enough to think at the time that if the science and engineering are good, the company's going to succeed. Well, little did I know and much did I learn that there are many more aspects to a successful company, finance, and other things that are needed for success. So the second company, the CEO decided that biology was too slow and not reproducible enough for him. The CEO had a background in medical devices and decided to turn the company around and laid off all the bioengineering, biology people and started making heart valves.
Well, that's interesting because Medtronic is there, obviously, and that's a major part of their core business.
They were acquired by Medtronic, ultimately.
So he made the right choice.
Yeah.
So in a current situation that we're looking at now in the U.S., roughly how many patents a year was the NIH involved with creating during your time there?
It stayed steady over the years. It's between 200, 300, low 300s number of new patents filed every year.
So, Gwen, you worked very closely on a project that we did with Mark, looking at a lot of foundational IP. How many patents did you actually analyze for drugs here coming out of the FDA approvals over 10 years?
It was just about 3,000.
And of those 3,000, how many patents did you find that actually had a government interest statement that actually said that this actually had a connection to government funding?
About 2%.
About 2% of the entire portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, does that ring true to you that that's roughly what you see?
Yes. A lot of the technology, including some that's patented and licensed, is also used internally. So for companies, vectors, for gene therapy, a lot of other things. So the massive impact is more in the development and the background, the foundational science, not as much in the inventions. The inventions that are made are very useful and have a significant financial and economic impact, but they're not as much the final drugs that are Orange Book patents.
Would you say that that's the major role then is de-risking?
Absolutely. A lot of ideas that come out of NIH funding are de-risking. It's either basic science or when it's applied, it's de-risking. So NIH and its grantees collaborate often with companies to do research that's not of primary interest of the company, but they want a partner for the research to occur. And yeah, much of that is de-risking.
So when we look at a statement made by Robert Kennedy Jr. in October of 2024 on the John Stossel show, where he stated that, quote, in 2016, FDA approved 220 new drugs. All of them were developed by NIH. Yeah, okay.
It's laughable. Yeah.
Gwen is telling me we've got 2% that have a direct connection with the NIH. Robert Kennedy's saying 100% are NIH. Why are we so demonstrably apart on this number? Why is this so far apart?
NIH does not develop drugs. It partners with companies. It may pass along technology, patented or unpatented, it's developed. NIH does not develop drugs. Recipients of funding have IP that are licensed and used in some biomedical products. But I think it comes out of this need for NIH to explain its role. It's a subtle explanation. It has this important role that ultimately give rise by industry to new drugs. So you want to explain that credit that's due and encourage more support in Congress for funding NIH because of its importance. But you don't want to say that we develop drugs. So that's sometimes hard to communicate, and sometimes politicians exaggerate it one way or the other.
You don't say.
And either don't understand it themselves or they exaggerate for effect.
Or political
means, right.
So, Gwen, when you were looking at these 3,000 patents, you actually looked patent by patent. You actually did this patent application, patent printing by patent, literally portfolio by portfolio.
Yes.
One at a time, 3,000 different patents. Were you surprised that the number was that low, given all the rhetoric that you were hearing about this?
Yes, I was. I really did think that there were going to be more.
And what was the reaction of the companies as you started rolling out these results?
They thought there was going to be more as well.
It was quite funny. I remember we found one drug where we actually had a Bayh-Dole patent, an NIH patent with a Bayh-Dole government interest statement in it. And the company was like, what? Is that right?
Well, that one was interesting because that was a biologic.
Right. That's a really interesting point because normally, as Mark has made the allusion to here, the Orange Book patents are actually publicly well-defined and available through the FDA website. The biologics aren't. Now, you came up with a very clever way to be able for us to analyze and search those Purple Book, those biological patents. How did you do that?
Actually, I looked at court cases to see what they might be fighting over or trying to extend. And then I found out that those were actually the composition of matter or mechanism of action that they were trying to keep under patent for longer.
And until that time, actually, I'd never seen a study that incorporated the biologics because those are actually really hard to track down.
I have not either.
Well, it was a brilliant idea. So, Mark, getting back to some of these issues about march-in, we've mentioned the fact that there's something called march-in rights around Bayh-Dole and the Bayh-Dole legislation. Can you explain what exactly march-in rights are in the context of Bayh-Dole? Because you were responsible for handling all of these march-in rights petitions that came into the NIH.
Yes, all but the first one in the late 1990s, which was not about drug pricing. Actually, the use of march-in authority goes back to many other efforts to fund research from the government, even back to the Kennedy administration. It's a backstop. I mean, the concern was that a company would license a technology and sit on it for anti-competitive purposes. So it's to eliminate or find a solution to that possible problem by requiring that any company with an exclusive license brings that product to market. One, that the university that claims title and filed patents makes reasonable efforts to license it, and that the company makes reasonable efforts to bring it to market. When they fail to do it, the government has certain rights. One, in that case, that it's not being developed under reasonable circumstances. The other march-in prong is when the company is not making reasonable efforts or not able to address public and safety needs. And that has come up in 2 cases that we handled at NIH.
When you say not able to handle public license needs, what does that mean practically?
Well, public health needs.
Public health needs.
Right. So in the first case, it was Genzyme, and they were making Fabrazyme. Their company, they had 2 plants, I believe, in New England, and one of them failed.
Had shut down from FDA.
Right.
That's right.
The biologic was limited. It's about half the supply because it was one of 2 plants, and it was being rationed. Patients were being harmed in having illness and possible death from the lack of sufficient supply. So the NIH was asked to march in. And when I look at march in, there are 2 prongs to that from my perspective of evaluation. One is, does march in apply? Does the statute and the authority apply in a circumstance like that? It did. And secondly, is march in the appropriate tool to address the problem?
Okay.
So in that case, we would keep it in abeyance while working with the university to see that the company is making reasonable progress. They had every reason to do their best to bring their manufacturing plant online. And so we wanted to be sure that continued to happen. So we were getting monthly reports for over a year from the company university until they brought it back to market, and by getting FDA approval for the plant that was shut down.
Now, if we look at this from the context of the use of march-in rights as it's been written by several of the U.S. senators for price controls, that would require the entire portfolio to be essentially government invented. Otherwise, if all the composition matter and mechanism of action are government interest, fine. But if they're not, you're not going to be able to have the whole drug.
License it to another company, you're exactly right. What they ignore or sometimes press for is the government has other authorities. The government, if it has the money and the authority, it can make anything they want.
Yeah.
They can infringe on any patent, and there are limited options for the person whose patent is being infringed. But to give it to another company to develop, you're right, exactly right. And there's only one, at least of a few years ago, there was only one drug that fit that category. It was Xtandi.
Yeah. And Gwen, you're one of the people who figured this out.
Yeah, that is exactly what I found.
When you did that analysis, and there were 3,000 patents, and you found that the only drug really practically was Xtandi that could be marched in upon.
Right.
What was your feeling when you saw that? Given all the hype and hoopla, were you surprised by that result?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was surprised. And that came up as a case, and they denied marching.
3 times. 3 times.
But isn't it interesting that the only drug we found and the only drug you received march-in requests upon was Xtandi? You would think that if there was a panoply of drugs that could potentially be attacked, they'd be going after other drugs.
Well, we had Norvir. I mean, the first was Norvir in 2004. We had Zalatan at the same time, and Xtandi. There were 5 march-in requests based on pricing, but for only 3 drugs. So they kept coming back with different congresses requesting the march-in, expecting the result to be different. And it wasn't. NIH had the same opinion and had the same result.
So we published a study a couple of years ago, as we've made an allusion to here, where we found, again, that 2% of the Orange Book patents really had a government interest statement. We've investigated now going back all the way to 1980 for another project we're working on for something that's just been delivered to the American Association of Universities. And again, going back all the way to 1980, we find that roughly, again, about 2% of all patents, even when you look at everything that's been done since 1980, since the establishment of the Bayh-Dole Act and march-in rights, is around 2%. Again, why is there such a disconnect here?
When you say 2%, you mean drug patents?
Yes.
There are a small percentage that are government funded that report it to NIH that have not listed it in the patent. And I think further you go back in time, that compliance is off. Even in the 80s, I'm sure compliance wasn't that great. But by my calculation, about 15% of patents that were developed, that were issued to universities, report them to NIH, but fail to put the statement in the patent. To have the full scope, you need to look at NIH databases, which list all the patents that were issued, reported to NIH as having been NIH funded, and the patents themselves for a government interest statement, because there's not 100% overlap.
Sure. Now, Gwen, when you were analyzing this, I mean, how easy was it to find this government interest statement? Is it pretty straightforward, or
No, it's not. It's in different areas. Sometimes there's a certificate of correction. They're in those.
Yes.
But they all have the exact same sentence. So you can find it that way with an algorithm, but you have to move it around a little bit.
And it's only really quite recently that the tools have started to be developed where this becomes doable at scale, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's this new database called the Lens.
Yes.
We're not promoting the Lens. We're not a client of them. But
Right.
has this sort of changed the game in some way to be able to do this more easily?
Yes, in years past it had to be done by hand, which was nearly impossible for thousands and thousands of patents. So yes, it has sped it up and simplified it, and it allowed people like us to do that kind of analysis.
Yeah, people with time. So, 5 years ago when we started analyzing the way that IP worked, we found that, funding is the statistical driver of approvals. From the year 2000, we found 24,000 roughly NIH grants that led to 8,000 patents. And if you looked at it statistically, when you saw the private market come in and value, you could actually predict it by the size of the investment and how early it came in that the drug would likely be approved. The concept is that smart money is smart for a reason, and they know what assets are commercializable and where they want to go. Now, at your time at NIH, there's been an increased desire to bring those commercial people and those commercial decisions closer and more in contact with the NIH to facilitate more rapid drug development in particular areas of high technical capacity and needs, such as like CAR-Ts immediately come to mind and some of the checkpoint inhibitors. How did that evolve over your time at the NIH?
Significantly. I mean, sometimes it changed a little bit by administration to administration in terms of how supportive they were of closer ties between industry and NIH. NIH cannot take stock or have a financial interest in companies. Some of the successes in the early mid-90s between licenses and CRADAs showed people how important it was. The hepatitis A vaccine, the rotavirus vaccine, they're all developed with collaborations between industry and, in this case, NIH intramural. And certainly in the extramural space, universities have run with this over the years and have quite a lot of success. But the other side of CRADAs is bringing molecules in for research. So I see three types of CRADAs. One in which the NIH has a technology like occurred in the hepatitis A and rotavirus, and they want a company to develop. And the best way to do that from the company's perspective and the NIH is to have a CRADA, a research relationship, in addition to a license. The other one, it's mutual technology. As you were saying, vectors and more complex technology. Both sides may have a technology that needs to be married and brought forward. And the third type of CRADA is when an industry has an important drug or biologic or vector that's proprietary to them that the NIH intramural wants to use to test it, to develop it. Companies will usually often not provide those unless they have the right to license new inventions that come out of that program. A company is not going to give their firstborn child to the NIH and have a new invention that blocks their use of it. They want to have the right to license exclusively and decide when that occurs whether they want to license it or let NIH license it to someone else.
Now, this program has been, like I said, quite successful. We've had some really important novel breakthroughs come out of this. There are increasing cries and a chorus of voices now. They're going after these programs on both sides of the aisle to say, hey, we don't want these anymore. We think this is collusion. We think this is corruption. I've heard that word used on the Hill. What would happen if it's decided that the NIH can't partner more commercially and start developing these things? What would be the result of that, Mark?
Well, disastrous. It's so important both for internal research as well as you were describing the feedstock that goes into the mix of developing a technology. It would be disastrous from the applied standpoint of partnering to bring new technologies to the market.
You've been involved in a project with us where we've been looking at some rather audacious claims by an academic named Gwen from South Korea, who's basically said by using patent paper pairs, he can ascertain the fact that government interest statements have been purposefully omitted from essentially patents that have been filed by the NIH. What have you discovered around timing of some of these patents? Because you have some interesting data that's really called into question the validity of his thesis and his publication.
Right. So if you look at the timing of the first patent to be filed in a patent family and these publications, which are said to describe the invention, the timing doesn't make sense to think that they're actually describing the invention. They may be related to it, they may be improvements, they may be precursor work, but the timing is often, most of them are more than a year before or many years after the application was filed. So if in fact a publication more than a year especially describes the invention, then there can't be a patent. So that doesn't make sense that there would be publications prior to a year that would be disclosing an invention. Even some that are within the year, at least since 1995, would lose the ability to file a patent around the world, particularly Europe. And that's so critical for biotechnology. And then you look at and see many of them are 5, 6, 7, 8 years after. It's not likely that an academic researcher would file a patent through their university and then
wait 8 years to publish.
8 years to publish it. Typical is the university professor or the NIH researcher says, I want to publish this. I'm publishing a paper, but I understand you want to review it for filing a patent. And the tech transfer office works with the university, with the professor or researcher, and says, okay, we got to get this in before you do that. And they fast track it or whatever they need to do to get the patent filed before they give the publication.
And what's interesting in the data you've presented, and we've been presenting to some folks here in D.C., it's not a minority. I mean, we're talking like 80, 90% of the patent pairs fall outside of this one-year window. I mean, it's crazy that this has been considered even valid. I guess no one's looked at this before.
No.
It's shocking. Now, Gwen, you did a lot of work analyzing the provenance of patents. I remember we were sitting there looking at like a patent that was registered to GlaxoSmithKline, and another study had said it was UK. And you and I actually went as far as to look at LinkedIn pages of the academics when they were actually publishing those patents and where they were based. It was that type of investigative minutia that you had to do to be able to ascertain the validity and the provenance of these things?
Yes. And oh my gosh, it took forever.
How many were you getting done a day?
Some of them were easier than others. So I would say maybe between 5 and 10.
And then you did 3,000.
Close to, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Gwen. You might need a raise.
I mean,
More
this
than
was
a
when I
full-time job.
first
It was
started.
a
This was
full-time
years
job.
ago.
So our Commons Secretary Lednick is proposing to take a direct royalty from all government-funded IP out of American universities. And the numbers we're hearing bandied about are roughly 50%. What do you think would happen if such a policy was implemented? Where would this end up?
The goose that lays the golden eggs would be gone.
Without an omelet.
Without an omelet for sure. And no chicks.
Yeah.
So the idea of reimbursement was discussed even at the time that the Bayh-Dole Act was being considered. That is, if someone had a successful invention, they'd at least pay back the grant that funded that invention. That was rejected. It came up again and again in different Congresses, and it was rejected because it would harm and not do any good. Most universities are still not making a profit or a small profit after they pay for, in terms of their royalties, after they pay for expenses. Patent expenses are high, and if they had to pay half of their royalties, many of them would be losing money or losing a lot more money. And also they wouldn't have as much of an incentive. The whole idea of the Bayh-Dole Act was to give the rights and the ability to license and the ability to keep the royalties to a recipient of funding as an incentive to engage in that activity, to pay some royalties to the inventor, and it would dismantle the whole thing.
We've looked at 271,000 patents with a government interest statement going back to 1975. What's really fascinating in that data is the average number of patents that an organization has is 1. The median number of patents an organization has is 1. The 75th percentile of the number of patents, the third quartile of the number of patents that an organization has is 1, maybe 2, depending on how we slice the data. It's really a very, very small subsegment, roughly 1% of all the organizations that we are able to capture, and that's capturing 180,000 patents where we can actually capture financial information. It's 1% that have 75% of the patents. So it's really a rarity where these things happen. A company gets successful and then starts developing new assets and starts monetizing government research. It's really wild. And what you suddenly realize is that if you start cramming down on the ability of those successful companies to have that revenue, what's going to happen is it's going to impact 99% of the companies who only have one patent. And you need those one patent companies in order to create the small becomes big.
Absolutely.
And if you start crushing that down, you're going to kill the ecosystem. Why are these ratios not understood? Everyone thinks everyone's just swimming in money in this sector. You're with a company that looked good, the science was good. You started in this business and it didn't work out. I mean, failure is the normal mode.
Yeah. And once you start clinical trials,
dear.
From the beginning, the failure rate is quite high.
Yeah.
Some groups and some people legitimately just don't understand. It's complicated. And others who want to make a gripe or make hay out of certain point of view they have, and they don't want to explain the whole thing. It's complicated. It's very sad that they do that.
Gwen, you're relatively new to the firm. You've been here with us about 3.5 years. You've been made a partner primarily due to the strength of the work you've done around IP. What's been your experience when you start talking to your family and your friends about the fact that it is not academia, it's really the commercial market that's developing this stuff? What do you hear from your folks who are rather, somewhat ingenues to this world?
Yeah, you do get the glazed over look. Sometimes, it's just start explaining it, and you really quickly come to realize, okay, I need to back up a little bit and explain things in a different way, use analogies, things like that, because it is really hard, and you start at the beginning, and then you're like, oh, no, wait, then it goes down this road over here, but it's connected over here. And to Mark's point, it is much harder to explain it in a way that people that aren't in the industry can understand it.
Is it really a situation where it's just so much easier to buy into the conspiracy that 100% of everything's invented by the government and we're all getting ripped off? It just seems like there's such a bias towards this mode of thinking now, Mark.
It's related to fear of drug prices and inadequate insurance for some people. And the people who push that agenda, it's easier to think, well, the government develops all these things, government's making all this money, companies are making all this money. Why can't they do something to fix this? Well, that's not how it works.
It's really fascinating because it's not tied to a political party either. This is bipartisan. Both sides are spouting this rhetoric now. It's fascinating. This is an actual bipartisan issue beating up on the industry and R&D now and the NIH. It's quite fascinating to watch.
And NIH and the government can't fight back the way at least private sector people do. And I think companies are concerned about the reputation that's given by some groups and what's their response to this? What's the appropriate response without sounding like they're just defending the undefendable?
Now, if you analyze the way some of the funding had gone over the last 5 or 10 years, I think there is room for reform. And I think you as a former employee would agree. There's always room for improvement. Are we risking now throwing the baby out with the bathwater? And what recommendations would you like to see if you were given a magic wand and someone calls you up and says, hey, Mark, we'd like you back and we want you to run the whole kit and caboodle. Jay Bhattacharya is leaving next year. What would you want to do? How would you handle that?
It's interesting that whether it's a Democratic or Republican administration, Congress is often giving more money to the NIH
they've increased
than the president's budget.
Yeah.
So the members of Congress in the past have fully understood the value and the importance and the interest in new treatments, new cures for diseases that we all risk. From what we hear, it looks like this year that the Congress may give more money to the NIH. I think the slash and burn doesn't work. If you're going to reduce money in some areas, you need to understand the impact. It takes time to evaluate it. Companies don't operate that way.
No.
If they want to reduce their spending or their employees, they carefully look at it to see what the impact would be. Where are their strengths? That needs to be done. And part of the problem is Congress that puts all these requirements through statutes on the NIH and other federal agencies that increase the bureaucracy and the work that has to be done that doesn't really help in terms of maximizing output and impact.
Are you optimistic? Are you neutral? Are you negative? Where are you now, Mark? Where do you think this happens in 5 years?
I'm negative in the next few years. I have hope in the long run that things will come back, but it will take a while. When experienced scientists, people who know how things run in a complicated system like government agencies, when they leave, you're left with people who, one, smaller staff, so they're not able to do everything that they need to do, and people who are less experienced. You need the wise people who've been around a long time to provide information and structure to those people who are deciding what needs to be trimmed, what needs to be expanded, what works, what doesn't work. They'll all tell you what doesn't work.
We're all good at that. Of course, everything works perfectly in D.C. Mark.
Right. Oh, yeah, right.
Mark, honestly, thank you very much for your time. It's great working with you, and wish you all success, and thanks for your participation.
Likewise, thank you.
And Gwen, thank you very much. It's good to
Thank
see
you. Yes.
The executive producer of the Vital Health Podcast is Dwayne Schultes. Editing by Caden Drake. The Vital Health Podcast is a production of Vital Transformation, LLC, copyright 2025.